When you think about super successful businesses that are selling through the roof like Heinz or Mattel, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing. But there's a secret. The business behind the business making selling simple for them and buying simple for their customers. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout as Heinz and Mattel. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/promo to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/promo.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Music, the show that looks at the money behind the music industry with me, Steve Lamack, and Music Ally's Head of Insight, Stuart Dredge. Lots of stories again to bring you this week, including a major new lawsuit involving the Universal Music Group, also Ed Sheeran's copyright case and massive profits at YouTube, amongst the rest of the stories we'll cover. But we should probably start with last week's budget and what effect that might have on music. I mean, it was always going to be a tight budget. There wasn't much the government was going to give away. Although, strangely, there are rumours already circulating that Labour are hoping that by next year there might be more in it for the creative industries. Although that won't be a lot of consolation to a lot of artists and people working in the music industry right now, not least our friends who run small live venues around the country. In the wake of the budget announcements, the Music Venue Trust has issued a dire forecast of what the budget might mean for them, which all stems from a reduction in business rate relief for grassroots venues. Tell us more about this, Stuart.
Yeah, we're diving into the weeds of financial policy straight from the start, which is what we both enjoy always. But yeah, this dates back to COVID, doesn't it? And I think in 2020, the government gave retail and hospitality and leisure businesses, I think it was a 75% discount on their business rates tax to help them tide through, and that was due to run out in April next year. And so the good news is that's been extended. The bad news is it will only be 40% now, so they only get 40% off their business loop. And then there were some stats, weren't there? The Music Venues Trust actually crunched some numbers quite quickly on this and said that reckoned that grassroots venues had to pay an additional 7 million quid in taxes from a sector that only made a gross profit of 2.9 million quid across 830 venues. So, I mean, you were talking about this earlier on. It's money that isn't there at the moment, which is why they're worried.
Yes, so it will be an additional cost spread across. Obviously, their membership is something like around 800 venues. So across the 800 venues, they'll need to find £7 million, which I think they're saying will, particularly at this time where the number of gigs are down for reasons which we've discussed before on the program, but there's less gigs going on, obviously, with the increased costs which are providing such a challenge for small venues already. So that's in energy bills and rental increases, and now less in the way of business rate relief, which I think they're saying it could place as many as 350 venues at immediate risk of closure. I mean, that's a frightening figure.
It is. And they did some numbers on that and said, I think that's more than 12,000 jobs, more than 75,000 events, and over £250 million in economic activity, which is one of those frustrating things because Labour is very much giving this message about it needs growth, it wants economic growth. And this is one area. But there's some kind of, I don't know if you call it jam ahead, there's some jam tomorrow. Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, did say that in the future, I think from April 2026, they're going to lower tax rates for the retail hospital. So in like a year and a half's time, the overall tax rates will come down for venues. But the worry that the trust said is that how many venues do we lose before then? And I thought it was quite interesting because they put this announcement out and they said the music venue, they got three ideas, like three ways to stop disaster happening. One was the government could rethink, which probably seems unlikely realistically. It could create a kind of £7 million fund that those venues could draw on to tide them over. And the third option was they could add 50p to the price of every ticket. So they could put ticket prices up to kind of help cover this shortfall. And it said, that's not what we want to do. It's not a good idea at the moment. And it's weird because the Music Venue Trust, Mark David, he's not, they give blunt figures, but they don't they don't like cry wolf. They don't catastrophize. But there was this quote that said, "The only possible option to stop a complete collapse of live music in our communities." So it really is a dire warning, and they're not given to kind of just, saying that kind of quote for the sake of it or to kind of create a headline. They really are concerned about this. So yeah. It's kind of worrying.
Do you remember the select committee which looked into grassroots venues and the grassroots, live circuit, which was held earlier this year? I think the interesting thing now will be, in response to what the Music Venue Trust are saying, is what happens next with that, because the word is that the government's response to the committee's findings will be published sometime this month, possibly even next week. But I think that report now, that will be even more important with regards to where solutions might be found to help offset this crisis. Otherwise, as you say, I mean, we could see a lot more venues boarding up their doors, which won't be good for anyone. If you are interested, by the way, in finding out more about this story and its economic implications, you just mentioned Mark David from the Music Venue Trust has written a really excellent piece on his Substack page, which is well worth a read. It's quite depressing, but it's very comprehensive and it's very informative. Right now, this next story, you're saying, Stuart, is the big story of the week, which broke today. We're recording this on Tuesday. It's so big, listeners, that Stuart WhatsApped us at about 10 to 7 this morning. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's always nice to hear from you, Stuart, but it involves Universal and the distribution company Believe, amongst others. What's happening and why is this story so seismic?
Yeah, well, this is one of those stories, like some lawsuits you can see coming a mile off, like the AI music lawsuits earlier this year. Like you could see they were going to happen, but this just kind of came out of the blue last night. So yeah, it's Universal Music Group. It's ABCO Music, who have rights to the Rolling Stones, Sam Cooke, a bunch of kind of heritage music, and Concord, who has rights to a lot of music. So it's 3 different companies. And they're suing Believe and TuneCore. So just to kind of set the context, Believe is an independent music company. It works with a lot of emerging artists, but it also has worked with Fatboy Slim. It worked with Björk and Anthony. Muramasa came through there. And then TuneCore is its distribution subsidiary. So TuneCore is somewhere where any artist can sign up, put their music out. But it's also worked with like Nine Inch Nails, Moby, and Public Enemy. So these are 2 companies that are well established. And yeah, this lawsuit, it's one of those lawsuits that right from the start just throws all these haymaking punches. So they claim that Believe is being used by, I quote, fraudulent artists and pirate record labels who are infringing on the names and work of big artists. And there's quite a funny list saying that the people who've released music through Believe and TuneCore. There's one artist called Kendrick Lamar, so Laamar. There's Ariana Grande and Justin Bieber. So these are 3 of the examples given of like artists, fraudulent artists who've released stuff that infringes. But also it's about accusing them of releasing sped up and remixed songs that pirate the work of big artists. And also claiming that Believe has used YouTube's copyright system, Content ID, to kind of claim royalties from other companies. The one thing I want to say here is, because of the way Believe and TuneCore are, this is about music released through them. It's not necessarily that these companies are choosing to release this music. They're thinking, right, we're going to kind of copy Justin Bieber and release this. It's that they're the pipeline, allegedly, for this stuff being released. So that's the kind of the accusation here. And yeah, Universal, this lawsuit says Believe is a company built on industrial strength copyright infringement, not limited to cheating artists on major labels, but artists on independent labels as well. And that's kind of a key point, because you could look at this and say, oh, Universal Music is suing a big independent company. This is about squashing independent music. And the lawsuit is trying to make that point that they're not just doing this to major artists. This is something that affects independent labels too. So that's the gist of it.
Right. What to say that again? Industrial strength
copyright infringement. Yeah,
I mean, they're not pulling any punches, are they?
Well, no, and it's so there's a couple of bits of context. So one is that, I mean, Believe and TuneCore, one of the companies, or one of the pairs of companies, who are kind of a challenge to the way major labels do business, because they are an alternative. So for an emerging artist, you could put your music out through TuneCore, for example. If that does well, Believe might sign you to their, because they're kind of linked. But also they can work with established artists who are maybe coming out of a major label deal and say, I want to go independent. So one way of seeing this is Universal Music and these other two companies are taking aim at one of the biggest companies that's a challenger. And there's, obviously there's competitive stuff there. But there's also been, and we've talked about this, there's been this backdrop of concerns this year about some of the music that is being put out through distributors. Like, remember we talked about TikTok and Merlin recently, and TikTok saying we're not going to have a deal with Merlin, the independent license agency, because some of their members were uploading infringing music or music involved in fraud. So there is this bigger like discussion or bigger worry about when you're a company, it's basically a pipe for anyone to release music on Spotify, Apple Music, and so on. Are you doing enough to make sure that what comes through your pipes is not infringing anyone's copyright? It's not speeding up someone's song. So there is a wider issue here that is, are some of these companies being witting or unwitting, the kind of pipelines for stuff that we don't want? But yeah, I mean, the other thing to say is Believe has yet to comment. I did ping them this morning, just after I pinged you, actually, and said, do you have a statement? They haven't put a statement out at the time we're talking. They probably will have by tomorrow, by the time we go out, I would think. But we haven't heard their side of the story.
Right.
Okay. But the other fun thing here is that earlier in the year, Believe nearly got bought by Warner Music Group. So Believe was kind of up for sale. Warner Music Group was looking around and it got the numbers to kind of, and then Warner pulled out and said, no, actually, we won't do that. But if it had bought it, imagine you could have now Universal Music suing a Warner Music subsidiary, which would be really spicy. But unfortunately for drama fans, that's not. But yeah, so it's a big deal, and it's all we've had is the lawsuit filing published and a statement from Universal Music Group. But we will hear more from Believe in the days ahead, and hopefully it will have its side of the story, and we can kind of judge.
Okay, we'll come back to that. So from one disagreement, one case that's set to roll on then, to one which has been settled. Ed Sheeran has beaten a copyright appeal over his hit single, Thinking Out Loud. Who was making the claim, and how has Sheeran emerged triumphant from this then?
Yeah, he's beaten it again and again and again, actually. It's one of those cases where you win, then you win on appeal, and then win another one. So this is about Marvin Gaye's Let's Get It On and Thinking Out Loud. And this has been rumbling for years, hasn't it? It's like, does Thinking Out Loud infringe Marvin Gaye? But it's actually a company called Structured Asset Sales, SAS, which kind of, if you're being sued by the SES, sounds quite scary, doesn't it? They just parachute in, I think, and knock you off. But it's got, I think I've found the stat, it's got an 11.11% interest in the royalties from Let's Get It On. I think it owns the share of the royalties from one of the writers. And it's been chasing Ed Sheeran saying, you infringe this. And yeah, so it was knocked back in court. There was another case, and that was knocked back too. And now an appeals court has backed it. And there's some really interesting stuff that's come out of this, which is one of the points is like, it was about the chord progression in the song, just the chord progression that Ed Sheeran did. And I think the judge in one of the original rulings pointed out that same chord progression was used 29 times before Let's Get It On, and then 23 times afterwards before Ed Sheeran released his song. And the appeals court kind of referred to that and said, look, if we protecting the elements could stifle creativity. So if we say you can't use that same chord, this could stifle. So yeah, so it's a victory for Ed Sheeran. But I mean, it's been going on for so long, hasn't it? Like I feel like I've been reading headlines about Ed Sheeran being sued for plagiarism, and he's having to spend a lot of time, or his people have been a lot in court. And although he's not necessarily there overseeing all the legal argument, it has been a big cloud hanging over him, which can't be much fun. So this might settle it, but you never know. I never know when there's another appeals court above the one that said no, so it could carry on. But you talked about this recently, didn't you? I felt like you said this recently, like this idea that when companies buy music rights, sometimes they might have more incentive to look for this kind of thing and sue.
Yeah,
I think musicians are quite relaxed.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? If you have invested, if you have bought a catalogue, as well as just seeing the royalties come in, then the other way of making money out of your acquisition is just offensively get on the offensive, go out and start suing people, and that's one way of getting your return on having purchased these songs. That's how some companies. Yeah, some companies are probably looking around. They've probably got people in a basement somewhere just listening for things that sound a bit like something else before then taking artists to court.
Yeah, whereas musicians, I mean, there was a really nice story this week, I thought, about Elvis Costello and Olivia Rodrigo. Did you see that one?
No, I didn't.
So Olivia Rodrigo's got a song called Brutal, and people have been saying that sounds a lot like Pump It Up by Elvis Costello. Like that's been kind of something that's noted. And people said, oh, it's plagiarized. And Elvis Costello came out with a reaction. He said, this is fine by me. It's how rock and roll works. You take the broken pieces of Another Thrill and make a brand new toy. And he talked about some of the things that he'd riffed off with his own music. So it's a weird thing, isn't it? I think sometimes musicians do get cross, don't they? Or they ask for credit. Like, look, you've got my thing. I want a credit on this. So people know it was my work. But they often they're more relaxed and they talk about, well, actually, I was influenced by stuff and I wasn't plagiarizing it, so I understand this. It was Lord, I think, did a song that was very, very, very much like Primal Scream. It was very loaded. I think Bobby Gillespie went, that's fine, you're just doing your own. Which, to be fair, a man who would be throwing stones out of a greenhouse if he was talking about music sounding like the influences. But I think that's so I think that's where, this Ed Sheeran case, it may bubble up again, but the courts seem to have said, actually, we're not going to let too much overreach happen of saying, here's a chord sequence, you can sue for it. And so that may stem some of the potential lawsuits of people chancing their arm, I guess.
I wonder how much money they're down the hole in legal fees now after various cases and appeals. I mean, they must have invested quite a lot in the hope that, they were going to eventually win this. We shall see if it comes back to haunt us again, this story.
Here's a problem, actually. I think the problem now is if Ed Sheeran hasn't got to spend money on lawyers, he might spend more money on Ipswich Town. And I'm really not keen to see that happen. So he needs to be tied up in legal fees for a few more years, in my opinion. But,
for new listeners, this is an East Anglian football rivalry. That's all I'll say. Next, well, we sort of tackled part of this story in our last listeners' questions episode when we talked about the threat from promoters to cancel Oasis tickets, which had been resold on secondary ticket sites. And I said, well, I mean, they've got to do something at some point. They can't just leave this threat hanging in the air now they've made it. But then, it was only a few days afterwards that they came out and the promoters and Oasis have reiterated that they will be cancelling anything up to, the figure is 50,000 tickets which have appeared on unauthorised resale platforms, this in a bid to combat ticket scalping. So it's happening. They have been busy and it looks like they are going ahead with this then.
Yeah, so they reckon about 4% of the tickets sold were listed elsewhere and somewhere there. Because you could list them on Ticketmaster and you could list them on Twickets, couldn't you? There was two places you could. And so they reckon 4%, which interestingly, so it was Live Nation and the promoter, SGM, were talking to BBC about this. And they were like, actually, 4% is quite good. And they were saying that often it's 20% for major tours, as many as a fifth of tickets for major tours can end up on these sites. So they were kind of saying we've done quite well in stopping this happening. But yeah, and all they said was they'll be cancelled and sold again at face value through Ticketmaster, and that's quite an important point. So they're not putting them on sale for 350 quid. They are going to sell them for face value. And if they do it by mistake, if you haven't listed them elsewhere, you can ask for your case to be investigated. So there probably will be some examples of people who didn't actually do anything wrong, and they've thought about that. But they haven't really said much about how they're doing it and how they identified them, which I think is one of those areas that has to remain murky because they don't want to give away the techniques to the people who are scalping, who are touting. But yeah, so it's good news. I mean, for Oasis fans who missed out, it means there'll be 50,000 tickets coming on sale for face value. And it'll be interesting to see how they do that. My assumption would be they might go back to the people who registered who didn't get them and find some way of opening up to them first.
Yeah, I don't think there's still going to be quite an outcry, though. I think when the emails start turning up in inboxes of ticket holders who've gone through these secondary sites, when they say your ticket is no longer valid, I think there's going to be quite an outcry at that point. It's going to be it'll be another story. I mean, these the Oasis tour, these gigs, which given that they don't even happen until next year, they're months away. But this whole tour has been a gift for news editors, hasn't it? Well, there's just acres of copy.
But it's also filling the gap left by the fact they're not doing any interviews as well. Yes. You've got to write about something. Do we were speculating about who the support acts would be a few weeks ago. That's been the only stories coming out that aren't ticket related. I think Cast and Richard Ashcroft have signed up so far. So there is, so like any news on these gigs is kind of getting blown up because Noel and Liam aren't talking.
Yeah. Yeah,
Liam's tweeting, I guess.
it'll be the speculation around new material next. That'll be the next
Oh, God.
story. I mean, the only in terms of sort of that's the national press and pop music. I think their only competitors at the moment seem to be Coldplay, and Coldplay have had to resort to falling through a stage to get back in on the front pages of the websites and pages. Did you see that? Did you see Chris Martin fall through a trapdoor on stage?
Yeah, this keeps happening, isn't it? I think Olivia Rodrigo had something like that. Like, what is this with trapdoors on stages and people falling through them? You sort of think there'd be a union saying, okay, how do we make sure this doesn't happen again? Let's close the trapdoor. There we go.
Do you know I fell off a stage once live on air?
Did you?
Live on Radio 1. Yeah, it was
What happened?
it was the NME tour. Do you remember when the NME did a showcase tour at the start of the year with 4 acts on, and we were taking the gig live to air with Oxford Brookes University, and I went on stage. So we're live on air. Went on stage to introduce a band called JJ72, if you remember them. And I walked on, did the link. Well, did most of the link, and then as I walked to the side of the stage to let the band come on, said, "Will you please welcome JJ72?" There was a gap, right? There was a gap between the stage and the monitor desk, which in the dark I hadn't noticed. And I just fell through this gap. One of the other bands on the bill, the rock band Amen, one of Amen's crew had to come and pull me out.
Was it like an Only Fools and Horses fall where you just go like?
Yeah, sort of what? I mean, can you imagine filling in the form? Have you been injured at work? Yeah, I fell off. Which reminds me, actually, this is something we must look into at some point. How much it costs promoters for the various types of insurance which they have to take out. When
do you think it's like a phone call where they go, right, how many trapdoors on stage? Oh, 6. Oh, that'll be $100,000, mate. Sorry, you've been here before.
That's a matter for another day. What's next? Oh, yes, the Hipgnosis Songs Fund catalogue has been valued at almost $2.4 billion. As I mentioned, we are picking up new listeners all the time, so some people might not be aware of what the Hipgnosis Songs Fund is. Do you want to briefly just give us the background into this valuation?
Yeah, sure. So Hipgnosis Songs Fund was one of those companies that just acquired music catalogs, so songwriting recorded catalogs. A huge amount of like big name artists from, I've got the list here in front of me. Red Hot Chili Peppers, Mark Ronson, Lindsey Buckingham, Fleetwood Mac, Shakira, all kinds of Neil Young.
Right.
And there was a long saga, wasn't it? We talked about, like you say, people might not have listened to it at the time, about the company was in financial trouble. Then it was the subject of a bidding war. Then it got bought by a big company called Blackstone, one of the big investment companies. And now it's had its catalogue, so the music that it owns, revalued. And it's one of those stories that if you're not in the financial industry, sounds bonkers. Because Hipgnosis Songs Fund was bought in July for $1.58 billion. But its catalogue of music was valued at $2.2 billion at the time. So Blackstone bought this thing for $1.6 billion, and immediately they're like $700 million up on the deal because the music is worth much more, which is kind of one of those crazy corporate things. But yeah, so it's been revalued by a company called Kroll Bond Rating Agency, so one of those big financial ratings firms. And it reckons the catalogue is now worth $2.36 billion. So it's been growing. And that is good news for Hipgnosis, because this helps it in various ways. Helps it if it wants to raise money to buy more catalogs. Helps it seem like a good steward of that music. It's doing a good job increasing the value. And it's kind of a reminder as well that like these companies buying catalogs have their ups and downs. Like they can run out of money to buy more and they have to then figure out what to do. Mm-hmm. But the music itself is always still valuable. Like the music itself doesn't suddenly become worth much less. Because
I was going to say that though, but surely some bands, go in or out of fashion. So does the catalogue's value go up when, say with somebody like, if you owned the Oasis back catalogue, surely that becomes worth more now. The valuation would go up, wouldn't it, at that point, in the same way that a band splits up or a member of a band leaves in disgrace or something cataclysmic happens to that band, then the value of their catalogue goes from whatever it is, $1 million to zero virtually overnight.
Yeah, kind of. It's really fascinating because there have been some stories recently about. So someone cataclysmic news. So Diddy is in the news a lot recently for terrible reasons, and there are a bunch of stories about how his streams have gone up because since it was in the news. So some of those things that you might assume that everyone would suddenly stop listening to him, actually his streams went up, which arguably means his catalog is worth more. But you're right. But I think part of the reason investors like the idea of music is it's kind of stable in that if you've got a band with a catalog of music, there might be an Oasis style event where they reform and suddenly it goes up. That's good. But overall, if nothing else is happening, it just tends to kind of grow because more people are coming onto streaming, more people are subscribing, so the money's going up. So people like it. Like music, apparently, is more predictable than other things you can invest in because you can take a, I don't know, say someone like Neil Young, for example, you could take a look, analyze their catalog, how many streams it's been doing, how it's been growing, and you can look ahead 2, 3, 5 years and say, well, this is what we think it's going to carry on doing with some degree of confidence. And even if, I mean, horrible thing about Neil Young is one of those artists who's a certain age where he might die, and that would be the big event that would happen. Mm-hmm. But even then, there might be a short-term spike, but overall, the pattern would be this. So yeah, so if you're Hipgnosis, this is part of your argument, is that this catalog is growing in value, it's not risky, and short of all these artists suddenly having some terrible thing where no one listens anymore, it's a good. So yeah, so it's but the other thing as well is Hipgnosis is trying to raise money at the moment. They're doing this thing where it's called asset-based securitization, which I feel like we should get Kieran in from the Price of Football to talk about this, because I suspect he would be much better than me. But it's when you basically say, I've got these assets, these music catalogs, I'm going to use them to raise money. So people will so it's a different kind of investment. And Hipgnosis is doing that at the moment with some songs by, I think, who is it? Red Hot Chili Peppers, Neil Young, Journey, the Chainsmokers, and Shakira, which is a corking Glastonbury Sunday lineup in the making. So again, yeah, this story about its catalogue has been valued a bit higher. There's a knock-on effect that it will help it do the stuff it wants to do over the coming months in terms of raising more money and buying more music.
This next story, now it's one of those, I have no idea what this involves or what it's about. I don't even know how you pronounce the company's name, but it says here, thank you, producer guy, music fintech startup Duetti has secured $114 million of new funding. For what? Who are they? What's this about?
What is going on here? So Duetti is one of those companies that buys music catalogs, but it's not just buying music from kind of famous established heritage artists. It's actually worked with more than 500 artists. Its big thing is independent artists. It will work with them. It will buy their spend it will spend between $10,000 and $3 million on buying catalogs from independent artists, and it helps them to earn money from that music by working those catalogs. So it's like in that same space as Hipgnosis, but kind of looking at more independent artists and current artists.
Okay, all right. I get it now. There was actually quite a good link then between these two stories if I knew what was going on. Well, anyway,
we've done it. Yeah, so it's one of those $140 million. That's a big funding round. And then when you look into it, they've raised $34 million from like venture capital firms, so traditional investment. And they've also done one of these, which I was just talking about, asset-backed securitization things to raise another $80 million. So again, saying we've got a catalogue of music, it's valuable. Will you kind of lend us some money based on this?
Do you find it a bit weird that we're talking about these figures and these companies who are spending millions of pounds buying up catalogue rather than talking about record labels spending millions of pounds on developing new talent? I think that's sometimes that fries my brain sometimes. Just looking at the amount of money that's flying around, people's back catalogues at the same time that, bands and, quite newish bands are struggling and we're not, possibly producing as many, acts as we should.
It's true. And Duetti is one of those interesting companies because so one of those big, when you've followed this probably in the industry, like this idea of you don't need a major label to release your music, that's been around for a while. You don't need to sign to a major label. You can do blah, blah, blah. And one of the missing pieces of that has always been funding for the artists, like where, you get an advance from a major label and that's what you use when you're recording and to fund yourself until the royalties come in. And so Duetti is one of those companies trying to figure out what's the alternative. How can we fund independent artists so that they can kind of go about their stuff and keep their ownership of their music?
Right.
So this is actually an example of one of the companies that's sort of looking to position themselves as a way for artists to self-fund, self-invest in development if they're not going down the label route. And it's a lot of money. Like you realize how much, like these numbers we talk about when you get into the world of finance and big finance firms. So Duetti says it's going to have a lot more cash to buy catalogs. It can work with a lot more artists. It's had 500 or so far, but it can work with a lot more artists now. And it's building technology as well to help those artists make money. So technology kind of to help them with marketing and putting the music out. So yeah, it's one of those things where I've been writing about them for a while. And it was always like this, it's doing this, it's working with this Italian artist, it's doing this kind of project. It was always kind of quite an emerging company.
Mm.
And now suddenly it's got this much money. So it has come out of the blue, but it's interesting. And it could be a positive story for the artists they're working with who are like, right, we want to go about things independently, but we need money to kind of fund us while we do it. So that's the idea there.
Talking of big figures, big financial figures, big headline figures, YouTube have made almost $9 billion in ad revenues in the third quarter of 2024. Well done, them. Is this bigger and better than ever before? Is this where all the marketing and advertising money is ending up then on YouTube?
Yeah, it's a heartwarming story of a tech giant making loads of money, which I know everyone loves. But yeah, so Alphabet is the parent company of Google, which is the parent company of YouTube. So whenever Alphabet does financial results, it always has a line saying YouTube ad revenues. And those, they're up like 12.2% year on year to just over $8.9 billion. So more than 10% of all the money that Alphabet makes, that includes Google ads, all those things, more than 10% of that is from YouTube ads. And there was a stat actually in their financial call saying over the last year, YouTube has made more than $50 billion from ads and subscriptions. And that's where YouTube Music, its streaming service, comes in because they sell subscriptions there. So I did some crunching on this, some number crunching. So YouTube's done about just under $35 billion in the last year on advertisements. That's where its money comes from. Mm-hmm. Which means around $15 billion from subscriptions, which it's not just YouTube Music. It's also a thing called YouTube Premium, which is if you want to subscribe to YouTube and have no ads, you don't necessarily do it for the music, but music is part of it. And then Spotify last year did $12.6 billion in subscription revenues. Really? So you can kind of see here, and it's not the same period. I'm not comparing like a different period, one is, but you can kind of see that YouTube and Spotify's subscription businesses are growing, and they're kind of competing. Like they're the two big. So that is, from the music industry point of view, it's good. And I mean, actually, the music industry people love YouTube at the moment because they used to hate it. Like there used to be a real pitchforks sort of mania of saying YouTube is ripping us off. There was a thing called the value gap they talked about of like YouTube has loads of music, it gets played a lot, and they pay us not much. And over the last 5 years, since it launched its subscription music service, that has turned around. And now if you see Universal Music Group, their boss, Lucian Grange, he goes, we love YouTube, it's doing brilliantly. So that is kind of the story here. Although the ad dollars was the kind of headline. Yeah, YouTube has got a really, really big growing music business. And that is money that is coming back to the industry.
Excellent. Yeah. Finally, for this episode, a new study shows that independent labels and self-releasing artists make up almost half of the total recorded music market in terms of ownership.
Yeah, so this comes from Media Research, who are this consultancy firm who they know their onions when it comes to kind of market research and understanding the industry. And yeah, it's about non-majors, which is independent labels, but also artists who are self-releasing. So it's everything that's not the three global major labels. And yeah, so it's interesting. There's two stats here. So one stat is that the non-major music was 34.2% of recorded music last year. But that doesn't include independent music that's distributed by the major labels. So Universal, Sony, Warner, they all have like distributors in-house who distribute independent music. If you include that as non-major, it's 46.7% of the market. So about 14.3 billion, which kind of tallies with something Spotify said back in February, which I think we talked about at the time when Spotify said half its payouts last year went to independent music. So this kind of tallies with that. So which is kind of at a time when like independent labels are arguing with TikTok, for example. it's a reminder of independent music is important. It's very lucrative. It's a big part of the market. But the other thing, the media did this release announcing this report, and they said the other thing is that so independent music distributed by major labels. So again, the stuff coming through Universal's in-house division and so on, that was worth $3.8 billion last year. So as weird as it sounds to say it, independent music is a nearly $4 billion business for the major labels, and that was last year. Which kind of whenever we talk about Universal buying a distributor, or when we talk about these kind of arguments, this is why independent music is actually quite a big part of a big growing part of their businesses now. And that's useful context for anything we talk about distributors or independent music or lawsuits. So it's kind of interesting, but I think it's good. It's good for indies, I think, because I think if you're independent, a big part of the job of people like Merlin and AIM and the independent music bodies is to say, look how important independent music is. Look how people, it's not just that it's critically acclaimed and people love it. It's about how economically valuable it is. So this kind of stat is actually really good for them to kind of wave at whoever they talk to. When they're talking to politicians, when they're negotiating with streaming services, this is the value of independent music. It's really important.
Yeah. Well, that will do it for this episode. Thank you very much for listening, as always. If you have enjoyed the show, and we hope you have, please do subscribe in your podcast app and give us a review and a rating. Takes 2 seconds, but really helps with spreading the word. Or, of course, do feel free to go analog with your recommendations to friends and family, or any rogue members of the music industry that you might think might be interested. All support gratefully received. Of course, which now includes, if you'd like to throw us some spare change, we now have a Patreon page where you can become a Price of Music fan or super fan for as little as £2 a month. You'll find us at patreon.com/thepriceofmusic. And finally, if you have a question of your own which you'd like answered on the show, just email us your music biz queries to thepriceofmusicpodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, take care, everybody. Cheerio.